The ground came up faster than Reed expected. He had maybe 4 seconds between the moment the shuttle's left stabilizer gave out and the moment the rocks met the hull. In those 4 seconds, he did 3 things. He cut engine power so the fuel cell would not ignite on impact. He pulled the crash harness tight across his chest, and he said one word quietly to no one in particular. Then the shuttle hit the slope, and everything became noise and motion and the smell of burning metal. When it stopped, Reed sat still for a moment. He checked his hands. Both worked. He checked his vision. Clear. He pressed carefully on his left side and felt something shift in a way ribs were not supposed to shift. Cracked, probably, not broken clean through, or breathing would already be a problem. He filed that under manageable and unclipped the harness. The shuttle was done. He understood that before he even got outside. The nose had folded against a basalt shelf, and the engine housing was open to the sky like something had peeled it apart. Smoke was rising in thin gray threads. Nothing was on fire, which was the only good news in the immediate area. Reed climbed out through the side hatch and stood on the slope and looked at the planet he had landed on without meaning to. It was ugly in the way that geologically violent places are ugly. Flat gray rock broken by channels of cooled black lava, steam venting from cracks in the ground where heat from below met moisture from above. The sky was a pale greenish-white, the kind of color that meant the atmosphere was breathable but not pleasant. Far to the east, maybe 30 kilometers, a ridge of volcanic rock rose against the sky like broken teeth. Everything smelled faintly of sulfur. Reed had surveyed worse places, not many, but a few. He went back into the wreck and started pulling out what he could use. Survival pack, which was mostly intact. Medical kit, which was missing the bone knit applicator but still had emergency foam and wound tape. His atmospheric scanner, scratched but functional. A length of paracord he kept coiled behind the co-pilot's seat out of old habit. 3 ration bars. His multi-tool. 1 emergency flare. The distress beacon had taken a hard knock. When he powered it on, it ran its diagnostic and told him the antenna coupler was misaligned. It would still broadcast, but at reduced range. He would need to wait 72 hours before the signal had any realistic chance of reaching anything that mattered. He set it to transmit, propped it against a rock where it had a clean line to the sky, and noted the time. 72 hours, 3 days, on a planet with no name that he had crash-landed on because a Drath military skirmish in low orbit had put debris in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment. He ate half a ration bar, drank from his water filter canteen, and started walking to understand the terrain around him. He found the evidence of the battle within the first hour. Scorch marks on the rock, long black burns that only high-energy weapons made. Fragments of hull plating scattered across a wide area, some Drath design, some from a smaller ship he did not recognize. Whatever had fought here had fought recently. Within the last day, maybe less. The metal fragments were still warm when he touched them. Reed was not a soldier. He had no weapon besides the multi-tool and no desire to meet anyone who had been shooting at things recently. He marked the debris field on his scanner and moved around it. It was the canyon that drew him in, and later he would not be entirely sure why. It was not large, maybe 40 meters deep and 60 wide, cut into the basalt by what had probably been a river a few million years ago. Now it was dry, and the bottom was filled with the kind of superheated mineral water that collected in thermal zones, pale blue, gently steaming, extremely hot. His scanner said the floor temperature was just above 60 degrees and rising as the day warmed. He stood at the rim and looked down mostly because it was there to look at. Survey engineers looked at things. It was the job. That was when he saw them. 2 objects at the bottom of the canyon, half submerged in the hot blue water near the far wall. Large, oval, a deep charcoal color with something faintly luminescent moving inside them, like light seen through thick stone. They sat at an angle in the water as if they had been dropped rather than placed. Reed stared at them for a long time. Then he checked his scanner. The luminescence was biological. Thermal output from inside the shells was higher than the surrounding water, which meant whatever was inside was generating its own heat, which meant whatever was inside was alive. He looked at the canyon walls. steep but climbable if he was careful about the cracked rib. He looked at the temperature readings on the canyon floor, survivable for a human in short bursts if he moved quickly and did not stay down there long. He looked at the eggs again. He thought about his beacon, his 3 days, and the fact that this was not his problem. He walked away. He got 20 meters. He stood there for a moment with his back to the canyon, looking at the gray rock in front of him, and had a quiet internal argument that he lost fairly quickly. He turned around and went back to the rim. "I hate myself," he said to no one, and started looking for a way down. He could not get them out that day. The temperature was already climbing, and his scanner told him the canyon floor would be dangerous within 2 hours. He spent the rest of the afternoon doing what he could from the top, lowering his thermal blanket on the paracord to drape over both eggs, reducing the direct heat exposure. It was not a solution, it was buying time. He camped at the canyon rim that night. He built a small fire from dry vegetation that grew in cracks between the rocks, enough for warmth. He ate the other half of his ration bar and drank carefully and listened to the planet make its geological sounds, the deep, slow groaning of rock under pressure, the hiss of steam vents, the occasional distant crack that might have been rock or might have been something else. He slept in short intervals and woke before the sky had fully lightened. He was already rigging the paracord for a descent when he heard it, a sound from below, small, careful, the particular sound of something tapping against the inside of a shell. He moved to the rim and looked down. One of the eggs was cracking along its upper surface, not breaking apart, cracking deliberately from the inside, in the patient, methodical way of a creature that had been working on this problem for a while and was nearly done. Reed watched the top of the shell lift away in one piece. The hatchling that came out was roughly the size of a large dog, dark-scaled, heavy-limbed, and it pulled itself upright with the slow, deliberate effort of something that was very new to having a body. It stood in the hot blue water and shook itself once. Then it turned its head and looked directly up at the rim. It had gold eyes, old eyes somehow, for something that had been alive for less than a minute. It looked at Reed and did not look away. Reed did not look away either. After a long moment he said, quietly, "Morning." The hatchling blinked once. Then it sat down in the water and kept watching him, perfectly still, as if it was waiting to see what he would do next. Reed picked up the paracord. "Okay," he said, "let's figure this out." The second egg started cracking 20 minutes after the first hatchling emerged. Reed was already halfway down the canyon wall when it happened. He heard it, a sharp splitting sound followed by a short, irritated hiss, and he looked down and watched the second shell come apart in 4 uneven pieces, as if whatever was inside had simply decided it was done waiting and pushed everything out of the way at once. The second hatchling was slightly smaller than the first, same dark scaling, but where the first had pulled itself upright slowly and deliberately, this one immediately tried to climb the canyon wall, slipped, landed back in the water with a loud splash, shook its head, and tried again. Same result. It made a sound that was somewhere between a bark and a cough, and tried a third time. Reed watched it attempt the wall 4 times before it gave up and sat in the water, looking furious about physics. He named the first one Stone and the second one Spark before he reached the bottom, and he was not particularly aware he had done it until he heard himself say, "Spark, stop that." When the smaller hatchling began biting the paracord, he had just finished descending. The canyon floor was hot, not immediately dangerous hot, but the kind of hot that told him he had a limited window. His boots were rated for high-temperature environments, and they were already uncomfortable. The water around his ankles was not something he wanted to think about. He had maybe 3 hours before staying down here became a serious medical problem, and less than that before the sulfur concentration in the air rose enough to require a filter mask he did not have. He looked at the 2 hatchlings. Each one was roughly 30 kilograms of muscle, scale, and bad attitude. He looked at his body, which had 1 cracked rib, a gashed forearm covered in wound tape, and no particular gift for lifting heavy things on good days. "Right," he said, We're not doing this the easy way. He had been thinking about the problem since the previous night. The canyon walls were climbable by him, barely, with both hands free and no weight. They were not climbable carrying a hatchling that weighed as much as a large person and had sharp edges on most of its body. What he needed was a different approach. He spent the first hour building a sled. Hull plating from the shuttle crash was scattered on the slope above the canyon. He had noted it the previous day, and it was why he had brought the paracord down with him. He went back up, working carefully and slowly because of the rib, pulled 2 sections of flat plating free, and dragged them down to the canyon floor. He lashed them together with paracord at a slight angle, creating a rough platform with raised edges. Not pretty, functional. The problem was getting it up the canyon wall. He found the answer about 200 meters along the canyon floor, where the wall had partially collapsed at some point in the geological past, creating a rubble slope rather than a sheer face. The slope was steep and unstable, but it was walkable. If he could get the sled and both hatchlings to that point, he had a way out. Stone followed him when he walked the canyon to find the slope, just walked behind him at a short distance, watching. Spark followed Stone, but spent most of the walk investigating every crack and steam vent along the way. Reed had to pull the smaller hatchling back from a sulfur vent by its tail, which earned him a sharp look and a sound he decided to interpret as an apology. That one would have hurt, he told Spark. Chemistry is not your friend right now. Spark stared at him, then it sniffed the vent from a safer distance and backed away from it on its own. Reed noted that and filed it away. The second problem arrived mid-morning. A lava channel cut across the canyon floor between their current position and the rubble slope. It was narrow, maybe 2 meters wide, but it was active, slow-moving, but genuinely molten, and the heat radiating off it hit Reed in the face like opening an oven from too close. There was no way around it within the canyon. The walls on both sides were sheer at that point. He stood at the edge of the channel and thought about it. He thought out loud because it helped him organize. Stone sat beside him and appeared to listen with complete attention. Spark sat on Stone's back and chewed on a piece of shell it had apparently been carrying since hatching. The plating conducts heat, but it's thick enough to cross if we move fast, Reed said. I can drop a section across as a bridge. It'll hold long enough if we don't stop in the middle. He looked at Stone. You understand what fast means? Stone blinked. Reed decided that was close enough to a yes. He dropped one of the hull plating sections across the channel. It was not wide enough to be stable, but it was long enough to span the gap with a small margin on each side. He tested it with his foot. It flexed slightly but held. He walked across quickly, feeling the heat come up through his boot soles even in that short time. He turned and gestured. Stone walked across without hesitation, smooth and steady, as if crossing a bridge over a lava channel was a normal part of being alive for 18 hours. Spark ran across at speed and nearly overshot the far side, caught itself, and made the bark cough sound again. Reed pulled the plating across after them and continued. The third problem was the passage near the rubble slope. At some point recently, part of the wall had come down and blocked the canyon floor with debris. Not impassably, there was a gap near the bottom, roughly 1 meter high and 2 meters wide. Reed could get through it. The hatchlings could get through it. The sled with both of them on it could not. He dug for 40 minutes with his hands and the flat edge of his multi-tool, moving loose rock until the gap was large enough. His cracked rib made itself known throughout the process in clear and specific terms. He worked through it because there was no alternative to working through it. By the time they reached the rubble slope, Reed's scanner told him the sulfur concentration at floor level was beginning to rise. He had perhaps an hour before it affected his breathing. He loaded Stone onto the sled first, and Stone submitted to this with the same calm it brought to everything. Then Spark, who immediately tried to get off and had to be placed back twice before Reed ran a loop of paracord around the sled in a way that gently discouraged exit. He had one emergency flare left. He had been saving it for rescue. He used it instead to illuminate the upper section of the rubble slope where his scanner had shown a narrow ledge that opened onto flat ground above. It burned bright orange in the pale sky, and the light showed him exactly the path he needed. He hauled the sled up the rubble slope by hand over the next hour, and he did not stop moving because stopping felt like it would be permanent. The rib complained the entire way. The sled caught on rocks and he freed it. Spark made unhappy sounds. Stone was silent and still, which Reed found oddly encouraging, as if the hatchling had decided to contribute by not adding to the problem. At the top of the slope, the ground leveled out onto a wide, flat shelf of basalt. Cool air, relatively speaking, breathable. Reed made it to the flat ground, took 3 more steps, and sat down heavily against a rock. Both hatchlings immediately climbed off the sled. Stone walked over and sat down next to Reed, leaning slightly against his leg. Spark investigated the entire area in a wide circle and then came back and sat on Reed's other side. The 3 of them sat there in the thin afternoon light, with the canyon behind them and the grey landscape in front of them, and Reed breathed in and breathed out and waited for his hands to stop shaking. They were heavy, warm, and completely unconcerned. He could feel the heat of their scales through his jacket. It occurred to him, sitting there, that he had just spent most of a day doing the most difficult physical work of his life to save 2 creatures that were not his species, not his problem, and almost certainly worth more politically than he could imagine, though he did not know that last part yet. He looked at Stone. Stone looked back with those old gold eyes. "You're welcome," Reed said. A shadow fell across him, large, moving fast, and then stopping directly overhead. Reed looked up slowly. The Drath scout was enormous. It hovered above the shelf on wide, dark wings, looking down at him with an expression that Reed, despite having no reference for Drath facial expressions, was fairly confident translated to complete and total bewilderment. It was younger looking than he imagined adult Drath to be, leaner, less armored in the scale around the jaw and neck. It stared at him. It stared at the 2 hatchlings sitting against his legs. It stared at the improvised sled made of shuttle hull plating. It stared back at him. When it spoke, the translator chip Reed wore as a small device behind his ear, standard equipment for survey engineers who worked uncharted space, processed the words with a slight delay. "You are a mammal." Reed was still catching his breath. His hands were still not entirely steady. The rib was making its displeasure known in long, slow pulses. "Biologically, yes," he said. "Could we do the species classification later? I need water." The young Drath scout's name was Liz, and she had never been this close to a mammal before. She kept a careful distance during the flight to the encampment, which was not easy since Reed was riding on her back at his own suggestion. The only practical option, given that he could not fly, and she was not about to leave him on the shelf with the hatchlings and come back later. He had climbed up with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done stranger things for field work, secured himself with his paracord looped around a natural ridge in her scales, and told her he was ready. She had not known what to do with that, so she had flown. The Drath military encampment was set on a high plateau about 12 kilometers from the canyon. From above it looked like a careful arrangement of dark structures low to the ground. The kind of camp that was designed to be packed and moved fast if the situation changed. Several large Drath moved between the structures. Patrols circled the outer edge at altitude. When Liz descended toward the landing ground, 2 of the patrols peeled off and followed her down. The moment Reed climbed off her back, the camp changed. He felt it before he saw it, a shift in the quality of attention around him, the way a room changes when something unexpected walks through the door. Drath soldiers who had been moving stopped moving. Eyes came to him. Then the eyes moved to the hatchlings, who had ridden the descent pressed against Liz's neck, and now dropped to the ground beside Reed with the easy confidence of creatures who had decided this particular human was a fixed point in the world. Then the camp erupted. Not in violence, in sound and motion. Drath calling to each other in their own language, rapid and overlapping. Reed's translator chip caught pieces of it, but not enough for full sentences. He caught the word for queen twice. He caught something that translated roughly as heirs. He caught Liz responding to questions she was being asked from 3 directions at once, her voice staying level while everything around her was not. Stone sat down beside Reed's left boot. Spark pressed against his right leg and watched the chaos with great interest. General Drawl arrived 4 minutes later. Reed knew immediately that this was the person in charge, not because of any insignia he could read, but because of the way the camp rearranged itself around the new arrival, the way water rearranges itself around a stone dropped into it. Drawl was older than Liss by a significant margin. The scaling around his jaw and shoulders had the heavier, darker quality of age, and there were long-healed scars running diagonally across his chest that Reed's survey experience told him were weapon marks rather than accident marks. He was large even by the standards of the other Drath present. He looked at Reed the way Reed sometimes looked at geological formations that did not make sense, carefully, trying to determine what category of problem this was. When he spoke, the translator gave Reed a voice that was deep and precise. "You will remain in this area. You will not move through the camp. You will speak to no one until the Queen has been informed of this situation." "That's fine," Reed said. "I'd still like water if that's available." Drawl stared at him for a moment longer than was conversationally comfortable. Then he turned and spoke to a soldier nearby, and a short time later a container of water was placed near Reed with the specific energy of something being put down rather than handed over. Reed drank from it without comment. It tasted minerally and slightly metallic, and was the best thing he had consumed in 36 hours. Liss stayed near him. She was not supposed to. Reed got that impression from the look Drawl gave her before he left, but she stayed anyway, at a slight distance, watching him with an attention that reminded him uncomfortably of the way Stone watched things. After a while she said, "You descended into the canyon." "Yes," Reed said. "The thermal level at the canyon floor is hostile to Drath's biology. We cannot go below the rim without protective equipment we did not have in field deployment." A pause. "You have no protective equipment." "I have boots that are rated to high temperature and a reasonable tolerance for discomfort." Reed thought about it. "And a timer. I kept track of how long I was down there." Liss was quiet for a moment. "Why did you save them?" Reed looked at her. It was a genuine question, not challenging, not accusatory. Just someone who genuinely needed to understand something that did not compute for them. "They were alive," he said, "and I could do something about that. That's the whole list." Liss processed this. "You did not know what they were." "I knew they were alive and young and in trouble," Reed said. The species question seemed secondary to the immediate problem. Another silence. Then Liss said carefully, "They are the Queen's heirs, the last surviving eggs of the royal clutch. We believed them lost when they were taken." She paused. "We were preparing for what comes after that kind of loss." Reed looked down at Stone, who was still sitting beside his boot with the patient stillness of a creature that had been born patient. Then at Spark, who had found a small rock and was systematically trying to break it by biting it from different angles. "Well," Reed said, "they seem fine." The Drath medic who came to look at his rib did so with the professional reluctance of someone who had been ordered to do something they found personally unnecessary. Reed pulled up his jacket, and the medic examined the injury with instruments Reed did not recognize and made sounds that his translator could not convert into words. Finally, the medic applied something cold and firm along the rib line that hardened within a few minutes into a supportive structure, not quite a cast, more like a brace molded to his body. It helped immediately. "Thank you," Reed said. The medic looked at him as if being thanked was also unexpected, then left without responding. The part of the camp that bothered Drawl most, Reed would later understand, was not Reed himself. It was the hatchlings. They had been born less than a day ago. In Drath understanding, newborn heirs should have been responsive primarily to their queen, to the biological pull of their bloodline. Instead, Stone had positioned itself between Reed and every Drath soldier who came too close, not aggressively, simply physically, the way a door positioned between two rooms. And Spark, who had stopped trying to break the rock and fallen asleep, was asleep directly on Reed's boot. 3 different soldiers had walked past and looked at this, and then looked away with the specific expression of people who were going to need time to process what they were seeing. Drath came back as the light began to change toward evening. He looked at Reed. He looked at Stone, positioned beside Reed. He looked at Spark, asleep on Reed's boot. The muscle along Drath's jaw shifted in a way that Reed interpreted as someone trying very hard not to react visibly to something that was bothering them considerably. "The Queen has been contacted," Drath said. "She will arrive tomorrow." A pause, very measured. "You will be given food and a place to sleep." "I appreciate that," Reed said. Drath looked at him with the same stone and river expression as before. Then he turned to leave. "Can I ask a question?" Reed said. Drath stopped but did not turn around immediately. When he did, it was with the slow deliberation of someone deciding whether to permit the question before hearing it. "You may ask. Who took the eggs in the first place, and why were they left in the canyon specifically? That heat level, it was lethal for them too if they hadn't hatched when they did." The quality of silence that followed was different from the silences that had come before. Drath's expression did not change, but something around his eyes did. Reed could not have named what it was. He had never read a Drath face before today. "That is a question," Drath said carefully, with political weight. "I'm a survey engineer," Reed said. "I find things and report what I found. That's the profession. I'm just noting that wherever those eggs came from before the canyon, someone put them there knowing the temperature was rising and knowing they would not survive it. That's not an accident." Drath looked at him for a long moment. "Get some sleep, mammal," he said, and walked away. Reed sat with the hatchlings in the dimming light and thought about what he had stumbled into. He understood politics well enough to know when he was inside them. He understood enough about situations to know that the person who saved the Queen's stolen heirs was either very protected or very inconvenient, depending on who was doing the calculating. He found Liz nearby before the camp settled for the night. "Quick question," he said. "Yes. When the Queen gets here, what happens to me, roughly?" Liz hesitated. In the time Reed had known her, she had not hesitated before answering anything. That told him what he needed to know before she spoke. "That depends," she said finally, "on the Queen." Reed nodded slowly. He had suspected as much. "Right," he said, "so I'm either a hero or a loose end." He looked up at the dark sky above the plateau. His beacon was still transmitting somewhere out there, 40 hours from Mattering. Somewhere up in that darkness, a queen was flying toward him with the full weight of a royal debt or a political problem, and he was not sure yet which one he was going to be. "Got it," he said, and went to find somewhere to sleep. Reed heard her before he saw her. He was sitting near the edge of the plateau, eating a second ration bar and watching the early morning sky when a sound came from the east. Not an engine sound, not anything mechanical. It was deeper than that, and it built slowly the way distant thunder builds, not sudden but inevitable, getting louder with a patience that made it worse, somehow, than if it had arrived all at once. The camp responded before she was visible. Every Drath soldier moved to a specific position with the precision of something long rehearsed. Liz moved too, and she caught Reed's eye briefly before she fell into line. Her expression told him this was the moment and that he should pay attention. Reed stood up. Queen Sova came out of the eastern sky like a geological event. She was to Liz what a mountain was to a hill, the same basic shape, but a completely different category of thing. Her wingspan threw a shadow over the entire plateau when she descended. Her scales were a deep blue-black that caught the pale morning light and gave it back as something darker and more complicated. She flew without apparent effort, each wing beat slow and enormous, and when she descended toward the landing ground, the air pressure changed enough that Reed felt it against his face like a door opening somewhere nearby. Every Drath in the camp bowed. Reed did not bow, not from disrespect. He genuinely did not know the protocol, and the moment arrived faster than he expected it to, and by the time he thought about it, she had already landed and the moment had passed. He was simply standing there with a half-eaten ration bar in his left hand, looking up at the largest living thing he had ever been within 50 meters of. Sova's eyes found him immediately. They were the same gold as the hatchling's eyes, but older in a way that made the hatchlings seem like a copy of the original. She looked at him for a moment, then at the half-eaten ration bar, then back at his face. Drath was already moving to speak to her, already positioning himself between Reed and the Queen with the specific body language of someone managing a situation. Reed watched Sova's eyes move to Drath and then past him and then back to Reed, and he had the distinct impression that Drath was not succeeding at managing anything. Then Stone walked past Drath. The hatchling crossed the space between Reed and the Queen in that slow, deliberate way it had, and went to Sova and leaned against her foreleg the way it had leaned against Reed the previous night. It stayed there for a moment. Then it walked back to Reed and sat beside him. No one in the camp made a sound. Spark had been asleep on a flat rock near Reed. It woke up, apparently registered that something significant was happening, climbed off the rock, crossed to Sova, sniffed her once with great thoroughness, and then went back to the flat rock and sat on Reed's boot instead. Sova looked at this. Her expression was not something Reed could fully read, but certain things crossed it in sequence, something raw and then something controlled, and then something very still and focused. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, Reed's translator gave him her words in a voice that was level and precise and clearly accustomed to being listened to. Explain. Reed explained. He started from the beginning because that was the logical place to start, and because he did not know enough about Drath's political culture to know what to leave out, so he left nothing out. The crash, the debris field, the canyon, finding the eggs, walking away, coming back, the night at the rim. The sled, the lava channel, the collapsed passage, the rubble slope, the flare. He described it plainly and in the order it happened, and he did not make it sound more difficult than it was, and he did not make himself sound better than he had been. He was a survey engineer who had run into a problem and worked it through. That was the accurate description. Sova listened without interrupting. The entire camp was still. Even Spark had stopped moving. When Reed finished, Sova was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You used your emergency signal to find a path out of the canyon." The scanner showed a ledge in the upper section of the rubble slope, but I couldn't see the detail in the light conditions, Reed said. The flare gave me enough visibility to confirm the route. It was the most useful thing I could do with it at that point. That signal was your method of rescue. Yes. You traded your rescue signal for a path out of a canyon. I traded it for a path that got all three of us out of the canyon, Reed said. The distinction matters. My distress beacon is still transmitting. I have another 30 hours on that signal. I'm not out of options. Sova looked at him. The looking had a quality to it that Reed was starting to recognize. It was the look of someone doing calculations that were not visible on the surface. What do you want, she asked, for what you did? Reed thought about it honestly, because the question deserved an honest answer, and because the worst thing he could do in this particular situation was be anything other than direct. A ride to the nearest transit hub, he said, and if someone has the tools for it, I'd like someone to look at my beacon antenna. I think the coupler is just misaligned. It would take about 10 minutes to fix. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. It had a texture to it. That is all, Sova said. That's all. You saved the royal heirs of the Drath sovereignty, Sova said, and there was something in the way she said it that was not quite a question and not quite a statement, but something in between. You crossed into a thermally hostile canyon alone, extracted 2 hatchlings, and spent the night guarding them. And you want a transport and a repaired antenna. I'm a survey engineer, Reed said. I found something alive, I kept it alive, I handed it over. That's a normal Tuesday for my profession. Something moved in Sova's face. Reed could not name it. Liz, watching from the side, would later tell him the expression was one that the Queen was known to make when she was thinking about 3 different things at once and had already decided on all 3. Then Drath moved. His attention had shifted to a screen being held by a signals officer to his right. He looked at whatever was on it, and his posture changed in a way Reed had not yet seen, not alarm exactly, but a sharp readiness, the coiling of something about to move. "Contact," Drath said. His voice was flat and controlled. "Warlord Vahn's fleet has entered sensor range, 14 vessels. They are holding position at the edge of range. No approach yet, but they are transmitting a hail." The camp changed again. The quality of the air changed. Soldiers moved to positions with a speed that told Reed this was a contingency they had prepared for and had hoped not to need. Sova did not move. She looked at the sensor screen that was brought to her. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Reed with those ancient gold eyes, and he had the specific sensation of being measured against something he could not see. "Warlord Vahn," she said, "sent a delegation of condolences yesterday. He expressed deep sorrow at the loss of my heirs. He proposed an alliance to help stabilize the sovereignty in this difficult time." A pause. He did not know they were alive. Reed understood the shape of this immediately. He was a survey engineer, not a politician, but the geometry of the situation was not complicated. Someone had taken the eggs. Someone had put them in a canyon where they would die without leaving marks. Someone was positioned to gain from the Queen's grief and the political vacuum it would create. And that someone was now sitting 14 vessels away, ready to offer sympathy while collecting the reward. "He's coming to confirm," Reed said. "Yes." "And instead you have 2 living heirs and a witness who was inside the canyon and can describe where they were found." Reed was quiet for a moment. "Which means you have something better than an accusation. You have evidence." Sova looked at him. "How much do you know about negotiation under difficult conditions?" Reed thought about the mining labor dispute. He had spent 3 days mediating with a whiteboard and bad coffee and sheer refusal to let either side leave the room until they had found something they could both live with. "Enough," he said. "I'm better with physical problems than political ones, but I can hold a position and I don't panic." "That," Sova said quietly, "may be enough." Warlord Vahn opened with sympathy, the way a sharpened blade opens with its flat side, technically harmless, but you knew what the other edge was for. The communication came through on a large projected display that the signals teams set up on the plateau. Vahn's image filled it, broad-shouldered even by Drath standards, with scaling that had a reddish tint along the ridgeline of his brow and jaw. He was flanked by 2 advisors whose expressions were carefully blank. His own expression was one of composed sorrow that, to Reed, read with the same authenticity as a pre-written condolence card. "Queen Sova," Vahn said. His voice carried the particular warmth of someone who had practiced the warmth. "I came as soon as I could. These are dark days for the sovereignty, and I would not have you face them without allies." A pause, precisely timed. "Your loss is our loss." Sova said nothing for a moment. She was standing at the front of the display area, and Reed was standing slightly behind and to her right, close enough to be visible, not so close as to crowd her space. Stone was beside him. Spark was pressed against his left leg. Then Sova stepped to one side and let Vahn see what was behind her. Reed watched Vahn's face the way he watched geological readouts, looking for the thing that shifted beneath the surface. What he saw was a man whose entire prepared script had just become worthless and who had approximately 2 seconds to decide what the new script was going to be. The composed sorrow flickered, not by much, but enough. Vahn recovered quickly. "The heirs," he said, and his voice had taken on a new color, genuine surprise, with something carefully built on top of it. "They survived. How is this possible?" the reports said. "The reports were wrong," Sova said. "They are alive and well." A pause. "I would like you to hear from the individual who found them." This was Reed's instruction. He stepped forward into the full visibility of the channel and looked at Vahn and his 2 advisors and the 14 ships sitting at the edge of sensor range, and felt his heart rate do the thing it always did when he was standing in front of something large and uncertain. He breathed through it. "Name is Reed Calloway," he said. "I'm a survey engineer. My ship was damaged by debris from a military engagement in low orbit 2 days ago, and I made an emergency landing on the surface." He kept his voice even and informational, the same tone he used when filing survey reports. During a survey of the immediate crash area, I located 2 eggs in the lower thermal zone of a canyon approximately 6 kilometers south-southwest of my crash site. Both showed active biological signs. I extracted them and transferred them to Queen Sova's forces when they made contact. He stopped there. He let the information sit. Vaughn's lead advisor leaned toward Vaughn and said something Reed's translator did not catch. Vaughn's expression had settled into something careful and watchful. A fortunate accident, Vaughn said. His tone had recalibrated to something between gracious and dismissive. We are grateful this creature happened upon them, though I wonder how a mammal, alone and stranded, managed to retrieve eggs from a thermally hostile zone that our own trained units could not access. It was a good move. Reed recognized it as such, an attempt to make him seem either lucky or fabricated, and to use the word mammal as a way of repositioning him as something small and accidental rather than a credible witness. I use standard survey engineering techniques, Reed said. I can provide the specific methodology if it would be useful. I can also provide my atmospheric scanner readings from the canyon floor. They are time-stamped, continuous, and show the thermal profile, the biological signatures from the eggs, and the route I used for extraction. He paused. The readings also show the geological coordinates of the exact location where the eggs were found. He let that land. Those coordinates fall within Warlord Vaughn's territorial boundary, Sova said quietly. She said it the way she said everything, without decoration, without raised voice. Just a fact, placed carefully on the table. Vaughn's expression did not move. This, Reed noted, was more telling than if it had. A man who was genuinely surprised usually showed it, and a man who had expected this attack and prepared for it showed a very specific kind of stillness. Vaughn showed the second kind. Territorial lines in this region are contested, Vaughn said. Geological coordinates in a disputed zone prove only that the eggs were found there, not how they came to be there. That's true, Reed said, and Vaughn looked at him slightly sharply, apparently not expecting Reed to agree with him. Coordinates don't prove movement, but I can offer to transmit all of my scanner data, unedited, with full metadata, to any neutral Drath archivist for independent review. The data is what it is. I'm a survey engineer. Accurate data is the job. Another silence. This one had edges. Vaughn's second advisor was writing something. The first advisor was looking at a screen. Vaughn himself was looking at Reed with an expression that had stopped performing entirely and become simply evaluative, the look of someone running through options and finding fewer of them than expected. What does a mammal gain, Vaughn said slowly, from inserting itself into Drath internal politics? Nothing, Reed said. I want a ride to the nearest transit hub and a fixed antenna. I have no interest in Drath internal politics. I'm describing what I found and what I did in the order I found and did it. If that creates political complications for someone, those complications came from the situation, not from me. The channel closed 4 minutes later. Not dramatically, Vaughn expressed that he would need time to consult with his advisors regarding the new circumstances, offered what sounded like a formal wish for the heir's continued health that had the texture of something said through gritted teeth, and ended the transmission. 14 ships remained at the edge of sensor range. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They sat there, which Reed understood was its own kind of language, not gone, but not committing to anything either. Vaughn was recalculating. Drall watched the display go dark and stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and looked at Reed with an expression that was different from all the previous expressions he had used. Not suspicion, not management, not the specific wariness of someone handling an unknown variable. Something more like the moment when a reading on an instrument comes back in a range you did not expect and you have to update your model. He said nothing. He walked away. Reed filed that under progress. Liz appeared at Reed's elbow almost immediately. Your hands, she said quietly. Reed looked down. His hands were shaking. Not badly, just the fine, persistent tremor that came after the thing that scared him was over, and his body finally had a moment to have the reaction it had been postponing. Adrenaline, Reed said, takes a few minutes to clear. You were frightened. Yes, Reed said. Liz was quiet for a moment. You did not show it. Showing it wouldn't have helped, Reed said. He flexed his hands slowly until the tremor settled. Being frightened and showing it are two different things. I've been on survey postings where the equipment failed and the extraction window closed, and I still had work to do. You learn to put the fear on a shelf and deal with it later. He paused. The shelf is pretty full right now, honestly. Liz seemed to be turning this over carefully. That is not a Drath approach, she said finally. I don't know enough about Drath to say one way or the other, Reed said. It's just what works for me. Sova called for him a short time later. She was standing apart from the main camp, looking east, where Vaughn's fleet was still sitting at range, and she did not turn when he approached. He will not attack, she said. Not now. The scanner data changes his position. He did not expect a witness, and he did not expect a witness who came with evidence and no agenda. A pause. He will withdraw to plan his next approach. That sounds like a problem delayed rather than resolved, Reed said. Yes, Sova said, but a delayed problem is a problem I can prepare for. The one I was facing yesterday, the loss of my heirs and the grief that comes with it, that one you removed. She turned to look at him then. I am not speaking of political advantage. I am speaking of the other thing. Reed did not answer. He did not feel it was his place to answer. In Drath law, Sova said, there is a formal recognition for a debt of this kind, the life of royal heirs preserved by an outsider. She looked at him steadily. I am going to name it in front of the fleet. I want you to understand what that means before I do it. It is not symbolic. It is binding. It means that the Drath sovereignty owes you a named and recorded debt, one that follows you and follows us for as long as either of us exists. Reed was quiet for a moment. Is there a polite way to say, you really don't have to do that? No, Sova said, there is not. Reed looked out at the horizon, where 14 ships sat like a problem in waiting. Then he looked at Stone and Spark, who had come with him and were now both sitting behind him, Stone still and quiet, Spark currently attempting to steal the multi-tool from his belt pocket. Spark, Reed said without looking, that's mine. The sound of the multi-tool being replaced was followed by a short, unconvincing silence. Sova watched this exchange. Something in her face shifted in a way Reed could not name, the third or fourth time she had done that, and each time it seemed to add to a total she was keeping somewhere private. In front of the fleet then, Reed said, all right. The formal naming of the debt was not what Reed expected. He had imagined something ceremonial, long speeches, structured ritual, the kind of occasion that required him to stand very still and try not to do anything wrong. What happened instead was that Sova spoke to her assembled fleet over an open channel for about 3 minutes in a voice that needed no amplification, in language that Reed's translator gave him in plain terms, and when it was done, every Drath on the plateau and in the ships above it acknowledged it with a single collective sound, low and resonant, that Reed felt in his chest more than he heard with his ears. Then it was over. That was the ceremony. He was given passage the following morning. The escort vessel assigned to him was a mid-class Drath courier ship, dark-hulled, functional and fast. General Drawl commanded it personally, which Reed learned when he boarded and found Drawl already there, standing in the forward space with the posture of someone who had chosen this assignment rather than been given it. Reed put his bag down and did not say anything about it, because Drawl did not seem like a person who appreciated commentary on his decisions. The journey to the nearest transit hub was 14 hours at courier speed. For the first several hours, Drawl stayed at the front of the ship, and Reed stayed near the back, and they occupied the vessel in the particular way of two people who both understand that they are going to have to talk eventually and are both taking their time about it. It was Drawl who crossed the distance first. He came and stood near where Reed was sitting and was quiet for a moment, in the manner of someone organizing what they intended to say before saying it. Reed waited. I want to ask you something, Drawl said, and I want a direct answer. That's usually the only kind I give, Reed said. Drawl looked at him steadily. When you found the eggs, when you understood what they were, what they meant, who they belonged to, why did you not use them as leverage? You had the heirs of the Drath Queen. You were stranded, injured, without a working transport. You could have made demands, safe passage, medical care, resources. Anyone with a rational understanding of the situation would have recognized what they were holding. Reed thought about this honestly. He considered the timeline, finding the eggs, the night at the canyon rim, the extraction, Liz finding him at the top of the slope. He tried to locate the moment when the thought Drawl was describing could have occurred to him. That thought didn't occur to me until just now, Reed said, when you described it. Drawl was quiet, not a short quiet, a long one, the kind that had weight in it. I believe you, he said finally. That is what I find most difficult to understand about your species. Reed looked at him. What do you mean? Every species I have encountered in my career, Drawl said, carries an awareness of advantage, what a situation is worth, what can be extracted from it. It is not a character flaw, it is intelligence, recognizing opportunity. But you did not do that. You did not see the opportunity. He paused. Or you saw it and dismissed it for reasons I cannot fully map. I saw two young things that were going to die if I didn't do something, Reed said. That was the whole situation. Everything else came after. But why act at all? Drawl said. Not your eggs, not your queen, not your political problem. Reed was quiet for a moment, trying to find an answer that was accurate rather than convenient. I've been in places that were trying to kill me for most of my career, he said eventually. Hostile atmospheres, unstable geology, failed equipment. The one thing that makes any of it workable is that when something goes wrong for someone else, you help, because the next time something goes wrong it will be you. It builds over time into something like instinct. He thought about it. Also, I just don't like watching things die when I can do something about it. I never have. I don't know where it comes from. It's just in there. Drawl looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked back to the front of the ship without responding, which Reed was coming to understand was Drawl's version of acknowledging that a conversation had said what it needed to say. Before disembarking at the transit hub, Reed stopped by the navigation station where Liz was working. She had come on the escort vessel too, on her own initiative or Sova's, he was not sure. He pulled up the survey data from the ashlands on his scanner and transferred it to a storage chip. Geological maps, he told her, full coverage of the area around the crash site and the canyon, thermal profiles, atmospheric readings, terrain mapping. It's good data. He held it out. I wasn't going to be able to file it anywhere useful given the circumstances. You might find it more interesting. Liz took the chip with both hands. She looked at it the way people looked at things they understood the value of. This is detailed work, she said. That's the job, Reed said. She held it carefully. Thank you. Reed picked up his bag. Thank you for translating and for answering my questions. You didn't have to do either. Liz looked at him. I was curious, she said. I am still curious. I think I will be curious about your species for a long time. That seems fair, Reed said. We're reasonably interesting up close. Stone and Spark had not come on the escort vessel. They were with Sova, as they needed to be, beginning the long process of learning who they were and what they were being raised to become. But Sova had permitted them to come to the plateau when Reed left the camp, and he had said goodbye to them there in the grey morning light. Stone had sat on his boot one last time with that settled, immovable patience. Reed had left it there for a while. When he finally moved his foot gently and stepped back, Stone had watched him go with those old gold eyes without any visible distress, as if it understood something about the situation that Reed did not, or simply had the long view. Spark had tried to take the multi-tool. Reed had caught it with reflexes that were getting faster from practice. Spark had made the bark cough sound, which Reed had decided 2 days ago was a laugh, and had then head-butted Reed's knee once, firmly, and retreated to sit beside Stone. He had stood there for a moment looking at them, and then he had picked up his bag and walked to the escort vessel and not looked back, because looking back was a thing he generally tried not to do when he needed to keep moving. At the transit hub, Reed filed the standard forms for an emergency landing and crash loss. Under additional contacts, he wrote, Drath Royal Flight, Queen Sova of the Drath Sovereignty, Diplomatic Status, First Contact Conditions. Under Outcome, he wrote Neutral Positive. Under Recommendation, he wrote Formal First Contact Protocols Advised. The Drath are more like us than either side is currently aware. He thought about it, then added, Do not tell them I said that. He picked up a contract 2 days later on a transit board, a new survey posting 3 systems out, a planet flagged as geologically active with no prior mapping. Exactly his kind of work. He took it without hesitation and was in transit within the week. 6 months passed. He was sitting in his survey shuttle above the new planet, eating from a ration bar, the same kind, because he had not gotten around to finding anything better, and reviewing subsurface readings from the previous day's drop, when the proximity alert told him a vessel had come out of transit nearby. He looked up. The vessel was Drath design, not military, not courier. The configuration was something he had not seen before, sleeker than the military ships, with markings along the hull that his scanner could not identify, but that his memory flagged as significant. It held position without approaching. It transmitted once, no words, no hail, just a single data packet. Reed opened it. It was an image, a high-resolution photograph taken inside a large, high-ceiling stone chamber that his survey memory told him was almost certainly the interior of a major Drath structure, given the scale and the material. At the center of the image, sitting side by side, were Stone and Spark. They were noticeably larger than he remembered, bigger through the chest, longer in the neck, the early softness of hatchlings giving way to the heavier lines of something that was going to be very large indeed. Stone sat with the exact stillness Reed remembered. Spark was caught mid-motion, as if it had been moving and then stopped, or had been asked to sit still and was making an attempt at it. They were both looking directly at the camera. Attached to the image was a set of coordinates. Reed looked at them for a moment, then he checked them against his current position. They were his current coordinates, precise, updated, accurate to within 100 meters. She had known where he was. Of course she had known. He suspected she had known since he boarded the courier vessel, and possibly before that, and that she would continue to know in the way that people who hold long debts keep very careful track of the people they hold them for. Reed looked at the image for a while, at Stone's old patient eyes and Spark's interrupted motion, and the chamber behind them that spoke of something large and formal and important that he had apparently, without fully meaning to, become a small note in the margin of. He saved the image to his personal drive and titled it Tuesday. Then he finished his ration bar and went back to his survey readings, because there was a geologically active planet below him and it was not going to map itself. And this was, in the end, and regardless of everything else, still the job.